It's just a formality, Alara. A piece of paper. Mark's voice was too calm. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a dark silhouette against the glittering city. Our penthouse was a monument to his success, all cool marble and priceless views. It never felt like mine. A formality? I whispered, clutching a throw pillow. We've been planning this wedding for a year. He turned, the city light catching the sharp angles of his face. Mark Thorne, venture capitalist, a man who assessed risk for a living, I was his biggest liability. It became necessary, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He picked up the document from the obsidian coffee table. It's standard. It just protects what's mine. What's yours? I repeated, the words tasting like ash. And what's ours? Our life will be built on what I provide. This ensures the foundation remains secure, no matter what. I knew what he meant. The $180,000 in student loans from my art history degrees. My job as a junior curator paid in passion, not a salary that could dent that number. To him, my debt was a character flaw. So this is about my debt, I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. You think I'm going to drag your portfolio down? Impatience flickered across his face. Alara, don't be dramatic. This isn't personal. It's business. He slammed the document onto the table. I need to protect my assets from your student loans. It's just prudent. The words hung between us, sharp and ugly. This wasn't the man who talked of partnership. This was the CEO of Mark Thorne, Incorporated. Tears welled, but I refused to let them fall. I thought of my Aunt Clara. A man's character is revealed in the hard negotiations. And if I don't sign it? My heart was a frantic drum. Mark's face went still. Then there won't be a wedding on Saturday. The silence was the sound of a dream imploding. I looked at the penthouse, the Basquiat, the Italian sofa, the view, a gilded cage. The price of admission was my dignity. I thought of the 200 guests, the dress, the shame of calling it off. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. I needed to see the bars on the cage before I walked in. I stood, my legs foreign. I walked to the table and picked up the heavy pen. Fine, I whispered. I signed my name, Alara Vance. The letters looked small on the thick legal paper. I was signing away a future I thought we'd build, but it felt like an emancipation from a fantasy. Mark's posture relaxed. The storm had passed. He pulled me into a hug. You see, it's nothing. Now we can focus on our wedding. His embrace was a cage. I stood rigid within it, my eyes dry. The wedding was a spectacle. I moved through it like a ghost, smiling and laughing on cue. My vows were recited with a hollow sincerity. Mark was radiant, the perfect groom. The prenuptial agreement was a ghost. Only I could see. The only genuine moment was with Aunt Clara. She held my hands tightly before the ceremony, her grip strong. You look beautiful, my dear, but your light is dim. Remember who you are. You are a Vance. We are made of stronger stuff. I kissed her cheek. I love you, Aunt Clara. I love you more, my Alara. Always have, always will. At the reception, I saw Mark subtly steer me away from my artist friends, his hand a firm pressure on my back. We left under a shower of rose petals. In the honeymoon suite, Mark fell asleep instantly. I lay awake, the weight of my decision pressing down. I had married a man who saw me as a risk. What kind of life was this? The next morning, as we packed, my phone rang. A Boston number. A cold dread trickled down my spine. Hello? Is this Alara Vance? A somber voice asked. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am the attorney for your aunt, Clara Vance. I'm afraid I have difficult news. The world slowed. Passed away peacefully in her sleep last night, after your wedding. I sank onto the bed. Mark was zipping his suitcase, irritated. Who is it? We'll be late. It's Aunt Clara, I choked out. She's gone. His expression shifted to a sympathetic mask. He put a hand on my shoulder. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. What terrible timing. Terrible timing. The words were so callous, they snapped me from my shock. My aunt was dead, and all he could think about was the schedule. The $15,000 suite, the first-class tickets, the designer luggage, it all seemed grotesque. The gilded cage was my reality. And as I sat there, grieving my aunt and the illusion of my marriage, I had no idea the document I signed was waiting to reveal its true purpose. What did you think? Is Mark the ultimate villain, or is he just being practical? What do you think is in the prenup's fine print? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily uploads. The flight to Bora Bora was canceled, replaced by a somber journey to Boston. Mark sat beside me in first class, a storm cloud of suppressed frustration. He alternated between typing furious emails and attempting performative, comforting pats on my knee that felt as hollow as the plane's cabin air. "We can rebook the honeymoon for next month," he said, for what felt like the 10th time. "The villa will still be there. It's just a postponement." I didn't answer. I stared out at the New England landscape below, a tapestry of my childhood. My aunt's cozy, book-cluttered brownstone in Beacon Hill had been my only true sanctuary. Now, the thought of entering it without her, there felt like a profound violation. "You need to focus, Alara," Mark continued, his voice dropping into the tone he used with junior associates. "We'll get through the service, meet with this lawyer, and be back home by the weekend. It's a simple matter of logistics. A simple matter of logistics. The death of the woman who taught me to read, who bandaged my knees, who loved me without condition." I closed my eyes, letting his words add another layer of ice to my heart. The funeral was small and dignified. Mark stood beside me, a monument to impatient grief in his $5,000 suit, a stark contrast to the worn cardigans of my aunt's friends. He was impeccably polite, but I felt the restless energy radiating from him. He checked his watch 3 times during the eulogy I gave, my voice breaking as I spoke of her quiet, steadfast love. Afterward, we entered the offices of Pendleton and Shaw, attorneys at law. The place smelled of old wood and dust, a world away from Mark's chrome and glass legal temples. Arthur Pendleton was a man who looked as if he'd been carved from the same oak as his desk. He rose, his eyes warm with intelligence and sympathy behind his spectacles. "Alara," he said, taking both my hands in his, "Clara spoke of you constantly. You were the light of her life. I am so very sorry." The genuine empathy in his voice almost undid me. "Thank you, Mr. Pendleton." His gaze then shifted to Mark, who was already appraising the office with a calculating air. "And this must be your husband, Mark Thorne," Mark said, stepping forward with a businesslike handshake. "We appreciate you seeing us. We're hoping to expedite this process." "Some processes cannot be expedited, Mr. Thorne," Mr. Pendleton replied evenly. "Please, sit." We settled into heavy leather armchairs. Mr. Pendleton opened a formal document. "This is the last will and testament of Clara Elizabeth Vance." He cleared his throat. "After specific bequests to her friends in the library, the primary beneficiary is you, Alara. She left you her entire estate." I nodded, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. "The brownstone," I said softly, I don't know if I can bear to sell it." Mark leaned forward, offering a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The Boston real estate market is quite strong. We'd be happy to have your firm handle the sale to make things easier." Mr. Pendleton didn't acknowledge him. His focus remained entirely on me. "The brownstone is part of it, but a very small part. The majority of your aunt's estate is held in a blind trust, established by her father, your grandfather, Alistair Vance." I felt a prickle of confusion. "A trust? My grandfather was a professor." "He was Mr. Pendleton agreed, a faint smile touching his lips. "A brilliant professor of chemical engineering. He was also a rather astute inventor. He held patents in polymer science. One, in particular, is for a composite material used in nearly every electronic device on the planet." The air in the room began to change, growing thick and heavy. The trust was structured to provide for Clara, while the principal grew. He continued, "She was frugal. She never touched the principal." He took a deliberate breath. "Alara, upon her death, the trust dissolves. The full assets transfer to you. The current valuation is $15 million. $15 million. The number detonated in the quiet room. It was an abstract, astronomical figure, more than 100 times my student debt. More, I suspected, than Mark's entire meticulously guarded portfolio. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the old clock ticking. Then, a soft, disbelieving laugh escaped my lips. It was a bubble of sound at the sheer, brutal irony. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, tears of grief, shock, and world-altering absurdity. Mark was statue still, his face pale. 15 million? He finally croaked. 15 million, Mr. Pendleton confirmed, his voice neutral. He slid a bank summary across the desk. The string of zeros seemed infinite. Then I saw it. The exact moment Mark's brilliant analytical brain made the connection. His eyes darted from the paper to me, and a dawning horror settled on his features. The prenuptial agreement. The one he had insisted upon to protect his assets. The one that now created an impenetrable wall around the $15 million that were now irrevocably mine. The prenup, he stammered, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. Mr. Pendleton, who I had briefed in a tearful call, raised an eyebrow. Ah, yes, the prenuptial agreement. A very prudent measure. The dry sarcasm was unmistakable. Given the timing, this inheritance is unequivocally separate property. It is solely Alara's. The rest of the meeting passed in a surreal haze. In the town car afterward, the silence was a physical weight. He turned to me, his face a mask of bewildered avarice. "Alara," he began, his voice strained. This changes everything." "Does it, Mark?" "Of course it does," he said, too loudly. "My God, 15 million. We need to think. We can leverage this, merge our portfolios." "My portfolios, Mark," I interrupted softly, finally looking at him. "According to the document you were so proud of, you were very clear about keeping things separate." He flinched as if struck. "That was before. This is life-changing money." "Yes," I agreed, holding his gaze. For the first time, I felt a true sense of power. It is life-changing, and it's mine. You made sure of that. That night, in a sterile hotel room, he tried a new tactic. He was solicitous, pouring me wine, talking of our future and our dreams. But the word "our" now had a desperate, greedy ring. I listened, saying little. The gilded cage was still there, but I was no longer the fragile bird trapped inside. I was the one who held the key. The game had changed, and I was just beginning to learn the rules. The flight back to our city was a study in starkly contrasting realities. Mark, seated by the window, was a whirlwind of frantic, silent calculation. I could almost hear the whirring of his mind, the frantic shuffling of spreadsheets, and the reformatting of life plans. He'd look at me, open his mouth to speak, then think better of it, closing it with a soft click. The words, 15 million, were a ghost in the cabin between us, haunting his every thought. I, on the other hand, felt a strange, burgeoning calm. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. I stared out at the endless blanket of clouds, not seeing them, but seeing the bars of my gilded cage with a new, unforgiving light. Each memory, each slight I had explained away, or buried, now rose to the surface, viewed through the lens of this new, brutal truth. I remembered our first anniversary, when I'd used my meager savings to buy him an expensive, handcrafted leather wallet. He'd thanked me. Then a week later, I'd seen it discarded in a drawer, replaced by a sleek titanium money clip a business associate had given him. More functional, he'd said with a shrug when he saw me looking. I remembered the dinner parties where he would expertly steer the conversation away from my work at the museum, deftly turning it back to his latest acquisition or a market triumph. "Alara deals in pretty old things," he'd say with a condescending chuckle. "I deal in the future." I remembered the way he'd frowned when I'd suggested a hiking trip for a vacation. "Darling, let's leave the roughing it to the college kids. We can enjoy nature from the balcony of a 5-star resort." Our life had been a series of his choices, his preferences, his comforts, all framed as being for my benefit. The plane touched down, and we stepped back into our marble-clad penthouse. It felt different. The air was still and cold. The Basquiat on the wall, which had once intimidated me, now just looked like a splash of angry color. The panoramic view was no longer a symbol of success, but a reminder of how high the walls of my prison were. Mark finally broke his silence. He tossed his keys into a crystal bowl on the entryway table, the sound unnaturally loud. "We need to talk about this, Alara, properly." "There's nothing to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice even. I walked to the sofa but did not sit. I remained standing, feeling the solid floor beneath my feet. The will was read. The money is mine. The prenup you insisted on protects it. The matter is closed. Closed? He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "It's not closed. This is just the beginning. This is a game-changing event. We need to strategize. We need to sit down with my financial advisor. No, scratch that. We need to hire a whole new team and figure out how to integrate this into our long-term wealth-building plan." "My wealth, Mark," I corrected him gently. "And I have no interest in integrating it with yours. You were very clear about the importance of keeping our assets separate." His composure began to crack. A vein in his temple throbbed. "That was before I knew you were." That I had what?" I prompted, my head tilting. "That I had money of my own? Does that change the fundamental principles of your prudent business arrangement, or does prudence only apply when you're the one with the upper hand?" He strode across the room, stopping inches from me. "Don't you take that tone with me. This is our life we're talking about. Our future. That money, it could secure everything. It could give us leverage, influence. We could be a power couple, Alara, truly powerful." "I don't want your kind of power," I said, looking directly into his frantic eyes. "I never did." His face darkened. The mask of the sophisticated venture capitalist slipped, revealing the petulant, entitled man beneath. "So, what? You're just going to sit on it? Let it gather dust in some bank account while you go back to your little job, cataloging dusty paintings for a pittance? That's an insult to the money itself. It's wasteful." "It's mine to waste," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through his bluster. "Just as your assets were yours to protect from me." The direct hit landed. He recoiled, his face twisting with a mixture of rage and panic. He was cornered, and a cornered animal is always at its most dangerous. "I see," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "So this is the real you. The moment you get a taste of real money, you turn into a cold, greedy bitch. You're going to hold that prenup over my head, aren't you? You're going to punish me for being smart." "No, Mark," I said, my calm finally breaking. Not into anger, but into a profound, weary sadness. "I'm not punishing you. You did that to yourself. You built this prison. I'm just choosing not to live in it anymore." I turned and walked toward the bedroom. I didn't take my usual careful steps. I walked with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. "Where are you going?" he demanded, following me. "To pack." The word hung in the air, simple and final. "Pack? Don't be ridiculous. You're my wife." "I am a woman who signed a contract with a business partner," I said, pulling my largest suitcase from the closet. "And I am dissolving the partnership." What followed was a whirlwind of 2 days. I moved into a suite at a discreet, high-end hotel, paying for it with the new black titanium credit card that had arrived by courier, linked to an account that now held more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The first thing I did with it, after securing the room, was to pay off every single cent of my student loans. The confirmation email felt like a physical weight being lifted from my soul. Mark oscillated between fury and desperate bargaining. He sent long, rambling emails, first angry and accusatory, then pleading and full of promises to tear up the prenup, to start over. He showed up at the hotel, but I had left his name at the front desk. They turned him away. My phone rang incessantly. Finally, on the third day, I answered. "Alara, please." His voice was ragged. "Let's just talk. We can go to counseling. We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix, Mark," I said, looking out at a different, but equally beautiful, city view. The foundation was rotten. You saw me as a liability. You can't build a life on that. "I was wrong," he cried, and I could tell he was genuinely desperate. But he wasn't desperate for me. He was desperate for the $15 million that had slipped through his fingers. "I love you." "No, you don't," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You love the idea of a wife. You love the control. You love your assets. And now, I finally love mine. I hired a lawyer, the best in the city, a formidable woman named Isabella Rossi, who specialized in high net worth, complex divorces. When I handed her a copy of the prenuptial agreement, she read it, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Well," she said, looking up at me over her glasses, "he certainly did a thorough job of screwing himself, didn't he? This is one of the most airtight, keep what's yours agreements I've ever seen. His lawyers were excellent. It's almost poetic. The divorce proceedings were swift, and thanks to the prenup, brutally simple. Mark fought it, of course. He tried to claim undue influence, that I was of unsound mind due to grief. But his own, meticulously crafted document was his undoing. He had no claim to my inheritance, and I wanted nothing from him. I didn't ask for a single piece of the penthouse, not one share of his portfolio, not even the car he'd bought me as a wedding present. The final hearing was in a sterile, beige courtroom. Mark looked hollowed out, aged. He stared at me across the room, his eyes begging for a lifeline I would not throw. When the judge finalized the dissolution, the sound of the gavel was the sound of a door slamming shut on a life I never should have chosen. I walked out of the courthouse alone, into the bright sunlight. Isabella Rossi walked beside me, a folder under her arm. "It's done," she said. "You are a free woman, and an extraordinarily wealthy one. What will you do now?" I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with free air. I thought of Aunt Clara, of her quiet intellectual life, her love for stories and history. I thought of the dusty, underfunded museum where I'd worked, and the countless other small institutions struggling to keep art and history alive. I smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time in what felt like years. "I'm going to tell a new story," I said,